Hello there, welcome to It's a Shaw Thing. I'm your host, Rob Shaw, here to talk a little fantasy football. Season is over, but we're not done quite yet. It's time to have some of our reviews come in, and now it's time to hand out some awards. First up, the biggest surprise of the season, positive that is, when it comes to wide receivers. 3 names to mention, and we'll go over them right now. First up, Steve Breaston, wide receiver for the Arizona Cardinals. Over 1,000 yards, 3 touchdowns. Who would have thunk it? After all, he came in as the 3rd receiver from that team. When Bolden got injured, he rose to the occasion, had a fantastic season. Steve Breaston is a name to know. This is a guy to consider for next season as well. He is in the category of biggest surprises, but not the #1 guy. Now #2, Vincent Jackson, wide receiver for the San Diego Chargers. 1,098 receiving yards, 7 touchdowns. The big surprise here is the fact that he's got so many other wide receivers on that team. You got Antonio Gates, the big tight end. You also got Chris Chambers, a talented player from Miami for all those years. But yet it was Vincent Jackson who had better numbers than all of them. Over 1,000 yards, 7 touchdowns, really came into his own this year. Young talent on the rise, big target, not necessarily the quickest of guys, but he's a big target who can make the tough catches. And for that reason, Vincent Jackson, one of the top surprises. And finally, the #1 biggest surprise this season, Antonio Bryant, wide receiver of the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. Over 1,200 receiving yards, 7 touchdowns as well. Now, coming into this year, everyone expected Joey Galloway to be the lead receiver for that team, but it really ended up being Bryant, who had just fantastic numbers. So for that reason, that's a guy to consider for next season. We're now up to the biggest disappointments, a couple of guys to go over there, and we'll start off with Braylon Edwards of the Cleveland Browns. The team in general, a huge disappointment. They did lose a couple of their quarterbacks early on, but still, 16 touchdowns cut to just 3 touchdowns this year. That's horrendous. Now, his 877 receiving yards weren't all that bad, but the 3 touchdowns are so devastating. This is a guy that people expected to be a solid, maybe 1st round, 2nd round pick. He was abysmal. Next year, look at him as equal page as maybe a Lee Evans. Next up, another guy who was a huge disappointment, even though his team has continued to succeed, Plaxico Burress. Sometimes you just shouldn't mess with guns, and particularly in bars and sweatpants, don't get along. Guy shot himself, ends up getting suspended, this and that. Anyway, at the end of the day, 454 receiving yards, 4 touchdowns. This is a guy that carried a lot of fantasy teams last year, and yet this is a guy the Giants rewarded with such a great contract early on in the season after a fantastic week 1. Boy, did he go down quickly. Dominique Hickson now has more value than this guy. Plaxico Burress, one of the biggest disappointments. And finally, the award for biggest disappointment this year at the wide receiver position, Chad Johnson. Oh boy, Ocho Cinco couldn't even get his name on the back of his jersey. What a bad year for him. Now, granted, a lot of it has to do with the quarterback position there. Carson Palmer got injured early, and Fitzpatrick isn't exactly known for his arm. So that being said, Chad Johnson had a couple things moving against him, but at the end of the day, it just wasn't the season for Ocho Cinco. The guy had 540 receiving yards, 4 touchdowns. And after all, last year, he actually set a career high in receiving yards. A lot of people were down on him coming into the season because he was disgruntled during the offseason. Well, I'll tell you what, Chad, you lost yourself a lot of money because I don't see any teams overpaying for your services anymore. Well, my friends, that's a look at some of the biggest surprises and biggest disappointments when it comes to fantasy football this year from the wide receiver position. Keep on opensports.com. There's plenty more to come.
For more great videos, check back every day on opensports.com.